So the hardest thing about making anything is structure. The hardest thing about writing a green is structure. What's the first question? What do you need in the intro? What do you need for the question 10? And it is the thing that will perplex you the most. How the story that you have, how are you going to tell it? The good news is that even though it's going to feel like you're reinventing the form, and will hopefully feel like you're reinventing the form every time you make a doc from now on, there are some ways to think about structure that will help you. And different structures work for different kinds of storytelling. There is one, I never went to J school. Apparently, Cindy Witten, our new boss, says she wants everybody to know that. So here you go, guys. I never went to J school. So I didn't learn the narrative structure that I think is usually taught, which is the whale. The whale is only one of what I consider three major different structures and a couple of variations thereon, all of which we'll talk about. And there are others, and you will discover others. But this is a really great way to start, and it will help you hugely. And one of the things you'll do with Steve is not only all the stuff about who's your main character and whose story you're telling, what story are you telling, how are you going to tell it, and he will work through with you at least a beginning sense of how you can do structure. It'll help with Matrimony, it'll help with everything that you do. So we're going to start by playing a documentary that was made by our friend here called...
Oh, we're starting with that.
We're starting with that.
Okay, fine.
Called...
The auction, or the tankard.
The Tankard, I believe. It's called
Okay,
The Tankard.
go to Papa.
Yes, so we will play The Tankard. So it's, what is it, 7 minutes?
It is what it sounds like.
So we will just sit and listen.
350, I got your bid at 350 in the back, 400 here, 450.
At the annual spring auction held last week at Waddington's in downtown Toronto, more than 1,200 items went under the hammer. Paintings, prayer rugs, chandeliers, and silver. Each piece had a history, its own unique story.
650 right here. 650, 196.
The Tankard, a documentary by Sunday Morning's Steve Wadhams.
333, we're coming to the, what's the best lot forward this evening, certainly the most important. American silver tankard. That's something that certainly doesn't come up in Canada very often, and in fact not that commonly in the States.
The auctioneer, William Kime, head of the silver department at Waddington's.
The tankard was made in Boston, Massachusetts, in the very late 17th century, around 1690. And it was made by a celebrated silversmith by the name of Jeremiah Dummer, who was not only a silversmith, but he was judge and artillery captain and ship owner and any number of things to Boston. It's extremely rare, a purest American silver collector's dream.
The owner, 44-year-old Graham Stewart, an unemployed mechanic from Lake Simcoe, Ontario.
The tankard was sitting, and we just kept it in a cupboard. It's been in the family for several generations. Didn't realize exactly what it represented until just the last few years, really. I started looking at it, taking a real look at it, and realized that, gee, I got something here.
The relatives, Graham Stewart's aunt, Mrs. Evelyn McCausland.
My mother kept biscuits in it, and I remember my brother, when he was very small, wrote his initials on it with a safety pin, and he probably got into a lot of trouble for doing that. I suppose they're still there.
Mrs. McCausland's son, Grant, cousin of the owner.
We had a fair number of heirlooms passed on to us from our family, which is very old, and that was one of the things that her brother got versus the things that she got. It's just, with the way things were split up in the family.
Usually we're balancing things. I'd say, well, you take this, and then, and then they'd take this. And finally we got to the tankard, and I said, oh, forget it. We don't have to balance it with anything. I told Graham that. He probably thinks I'm trying to, now I want money for that, but I don't, of course.
333, who'll start me off at $5,000? 5,000 I bid at 5,000, 5,000, 6,000.
A lot of work has gone into making sure that the right people knew that this tankard was coming up for sale, and an equal amount of worry about whether or not they really cared.
14,000.
We've published estimates of 15 to 20,000. Verbally, we've given estimates as high as 30,000.
17,000. 17,000 back there on my right now, 18,000. 18,000, 19,000.
till this point, there have been a number of hands in the air. One by one, they've fallen away. I'm left now with 2 bidders.
26,000, 27,000, 28,000, 29,000.
Both of the bidders are dealers. Neither knows that the other is in the sale room. Both are American dealers, one from New York State and the other from New England.
33,000, 34,000, 35,000, 36,000.
Each of them knows his reputation as a dealer and a top dealer in the field is at stake.
38,000, 39,000, 40,000, 41,000, 42,000, 43,000, 44,000, 45,000, 46,000, 47,000, 48,000, 49,000 at the back, 50,000.
At 50,000, I really began to think that I didn't know where this could stop. And I changed the bidding into $2,000 bids.
56,000, 58,000.
Both bidders are uncomfortable and hesitant.
64,000, 68,000, 70,000 at the back. 70,000 at the back of the room at $70,000. $70,000 then all signed at the back of the room at $70,000. I'll give you a second. $70,000, all silent. 70,000.
Thank you. I feel extremely elated. This figure of 70,000 is 3 times the previous record for an American tankard sold at public auction. To me, that's the most I've ever sold anything for.
There's a copy of your bill, and the amount was too large for a cash register to handle, so I had to divide it into 8 separate amounts, and they're all rung in there, sort of.
Thank you very much.
The tankard's new owner, Jonathan Trace, 45, of Putnam Valley, New York State.
Did you expect to have to pay $70,000 for that?
No, not at all. I thought it would probably bring in the range of $50,000.
What do you know about the piece?
Well, Jeremiah Dummer was one of the earliest important Boston silversmiths, and his work today is very, very scarce. What is extant is in museums. This is the first piece to be on the market in many years. Anything made in America before 1700 is very, very interesting.
Graham Stewart, former owner, now richer by $70,000.
I did not expect it to go for that much. No, I didn't, no. I figured maybe around 15. I'm absolutely flabbergasted.
How did you feel when the tankard went up on the block?
I loved it. I loved it. I need the money.
1,000, I bid on the aisle at $1,000 a lot, 1,000. On my left now at $1,000 a lot, 1,000, 1,000, 1,100, 1,200.
The next item of special interest, Lot 402, a muzzle-loading flintlock, said to have been owned by the Scottish poet, Robbie Burns.
2,000 on the aisle now, 2,000 right here, 2,200, 2,200, 2,400.
For Sunday morning, I'm Steve Wadhams at Waddington's Auction House in Toronto.
3,000, 3,000, 3,200, 3,400.
So, what is the structure?
Is that a question to me?
No,
No.
it's to them.
I didn't go to J school either, so I don't know what it's called, but to me it was very much, here's the current scene, here's the characters, here's the background, and here's what's going to happen. The thing that surprised me is that it carried on to show life goes on, here's the next item on the block, you know. That was a surprise ending for me. That I don't know what that's called.
It's not a trick question, you guys. I mentioned it to begin with. It is the whale. Yes, the whale, the whale, the whale. So I'm going to draw the whale as it and go through it as I understand it, as a non-grad. And then we are going to talk with Steve about where you see, how you see what you heard fitting into the theory of the whale. So the whale starts on a graph. This is intensity. So this obviously more intensity, and this is time. One of the important things about the whale structure is that, oh, this stinks, poof. is that this can apply to a 2-minute piece or a 4-hour piece. What matters is not the length of time, but the proportion that each section of the whale occupies in the piece. So I'm not a very good drawer, and somebody will, in fact, the last time we did this, somebody redrew my whale for me because they weren't happy with my whale,
Oh,
the
you're looking at me.
wretches. So we start here. The Chickbuckle whale has a little head. It has a big body, and then it trails off. So it sort of looks more like an igloo. This portion of the whale is the setup, the exposition. It tells us what's at stake, right? So one, other than Steve Wadhams, my other best teacher when it came to story structure was Rudy Wiebe. I don't know if you know him. He's an Alberta novelist and short story writer. His view was that every story, and I apply this to documentary as well, is in fact a mystery. And the mystery is hinted at within the first paragraph, sometimes within the first sentence of the story. Same with the novel. So what's at stake? What am I going to learn? What is this whole thing going to be about? Happens really quickly and off the top. Something happens. There's a moment where this is the point of no return. We're on this journey now. We're going. There will be this rising tension. There will be a climax. Where the tension is released. Then there will be the denouement in first-year English terms, where there's a kind of reflection, sometimes a moral evaluation. And we come to an end. And in this particular example of the whale, as you said, he's got a little tail because he's suggesting there's another whale right behind him. So that basically is the J School version of the whale. What he just gave us was a perfect example of the whale. Sorry, there's one more piece, I guess, too, before this, is there's a point somewhere before the climax. So you have a point of no return, but you also have a point where something destabilizes your understanding of the story. If it was completely predictable from here to here, not very interesting. But the moment something happens that changes what you thought you were about to hear, where you thought this thing was going, kapoom, you're interested again. So that's basically the center point of the piece, and it's a point at which your understanding is destabilized.
Blowhole.
Otherwise known as the blowhole.
Thank you, Don.
Understanding is destabilized. Am I missing anything, Mr. Sir Wadhams?
No.
So, really ugly whale, poor whale. So, somebody tell me, what's the exposition? What's at stake? Where's the exposition? What did you hear? Microphone, take the microphone. Yeah, please.
I will start if it can stretch. So I guess following the arc of the actual auction, using that as sort of the natural flow. And what I liked, I guess, just sort of starting off the top, is setting up the tension of we don't know how much it's going to go for, but also that little remark from the female voice being like, we're not interested in the money, which sort of hints that there's going to be maybe some conflict with that, or it's going to go for way more. And then I guess the destabilized, sort of building as the money increases in the destabilizer, I guess would be the auctioneer or the auction house person sort of saying, well, we don't know how much, like this is sort of surpassing our expectations, and suddenly you think it's going to be just a normal, like they estimated 15,000, 20,000, and suddenly it just keeps going up. So for me, I guess that's where suddenly it's like, oh wait, this is actually a valuable item, whereas
Yeah.
before you're like, is it a piece of junk? I
Yeah.
don't know.
How interested am I going to be in a tankard, for heaven's
Yeah,
sakes?
yeah.
And how about the point of no return? Where's the point where this story's going where it's going?
Maybe the 30,000 mark. Like that was the most it could ever go for. I think maybe that's
Remember it's relatively soon on the time continuum. So the 30,000 mark was about here, I think. Hey, was it roughly?
Or just
Yeah.
when it kicks off, like once the hammer.
Yep.
Maybe
Sorry.
the $2,000.
I think the fact that this thing's going for sale and we're going to see where it goes is the moment, as you said, the hammer goes down, right? Boom. So that's relatively early in the piece. We've got it set up. We know the characters. We know something a little bit about who's involved. He's done a very efficient and unscript-heavy way of setting up. Ba-doom, 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 ba-doom. The hammer goes down. Tsk. Now we're going to find out how much this bit of silver is going to go for. Do other people have an idea of what they think the center point was, or the moment where it become your understanding of what's going to happen is destabilized? There's no right answers, you guys. This is all, just. I'm not your teacher. What do you think? Is it the moment where it starts to go over the set price? There's a room full of people shaking their head yes, silently, which is no good for our friends in far-flung places who have to listen and watch this. Is that the blowhole, you think? Yeah? Yeah, anything else that destabilizes your understanding of this thing?
Well, after a certain point, if we know that our realistic expectations that it's going to go for X amount, once it goes above a certain amount, 50, 60, you start to think, well, it could just go anywhere. Like it could continue. Like where exactly is this going to go? It's sort of out of your control at that point. So I do think that $2,000 moment, it could have just kept going. I was surprised that it stopped at 70. I was like, oh my gosh, it could go to 100, So.
Actually, I guess there's also the additional tension because at the beginning it's about Graham, I think, the guy who's selling the silver, and then there's the introduction of suddenly you're down to these two American bidders, and suddenly it's like their reputation's at stake, and then suddenly it's another like, oh wait, it is about more than just this one guy selling things. So that's sort of another.
Yeah. So it goes from what's at
destabilizing.
stake is how much money is Graham going to make to a new set of characters who have everything, including their professional reputations online. So that is another point at which your understanding of the story is destabilized, because suddenly it's more complicated. It's more complicated than just a dollar amount. For sure. And the climax. Annie, what's the climax? Grab the mic.
Well, I mean, I guess when he's repeating 70,000, 70,000, then there's a moment of silence, and then it's okay. That's the price.
Yeah.
I think for me, that would be the climax.
That would be the climax. Anybody else?
I had, I have to say, I don't know if I ever felt destabilized. I don't know if that. I kind of felt like because it's since there was a radio piece made about it, it's obviously going to go for more than you think. If we knew it was going to go for 30,000, it went for 30,000. So I was expecting it to go for quite a large amount. I was thinking that the climax for me was I was thinking that he was going to have this great remorse and we'd have some kind of epiphany on his part. And I actually loved the kind of humor and the honesty, and I loved it. I thought that was great. That was my favorite part, because it was like, I just need the money. I'm unemployed. And he was introduced as that way. Yep. So to me, that was my climax. It kind of gave me the answers as to the human element of it and what we expect and think should happen with story. And it's just like, it's just a practical thing. I got my money. I have a job. That was great. See you next item. I loved it. It broke my expectations.
Yeah, great. The denouement, the reflection, the moral evaluation. Not a lot of morality in this one.
Can I just say that when I made this piece, I had never heard of the whale. I did not go to J school. I had no idea of any of this. So there you are.
Yeah.
Everything of this that we're looking at now came afterwards in my own understanding of structure. So please don't think that I went out with a template and delivered the template. I hadn't got a clue. So there you are.
As most of us don't, but you guys will have. Lucky you. So the interesting thing is, one of the reasons it works so well as an example and as a documentary, every story is richer in some ways than the maker even knows, right? So the fact that you hear it that way, and Steve may have intended something else and you hear something else, it's all fantastic. It means that there's a multiplicity of things going on within the story, even something as simple as selling a tankard. And that is what we hope for, right? So when you make your piece about, your piece is in essence exactly that, right? It's about how people construct narratives about the fact that this man is alone. And the multiplicity of possible interpretations is exactly what good storytelling is about. So in a weird way, your doc is like a meta doc about docs. Let's think about that, shall we?
Can I just say one more thing about the centre point?
No.
All right.
Yes,
sorry,
you
we haven't got time. It's television. Right?
Yes.
No, the concept of the centre point, I had, the whale is one thing, but the Stephen Schwartz, whose name I possibly will, I will invoke later, was the fellow who showed me anyway this idea of the centre point. So what happened with me is that I went back over this piece, which had been made years before, and tried to figure out, was there a structure there that I didn't understand when I made the piece? I lucked into it, or it was naturally occurring because the auction has its own tension, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I didn't mess up the inherent tension of the piece. But the centre point concept was much more subtle, and the word destabilize, I'm thinking of Stephen's description, is a tad, it's true, but it's on the strong end of true. And what he said to me was that you would shift in perception of your story. It doesn't mean to say it is a destabilization in the definite, that's true. So is there a shift in, yes, you're following the tankard story and it's going to get sold and the relatives will have their bun fight afterwards, whatever. But there's this other thing, like the story's also about something else. And I mean, I think for me that's what it is. Yes, it's an old-fashioned fight, duel between two people whose reputations are at stake. And it almost doesn't matter what they're fighting over, really. I mean, yes, it's silverware because that's their profession, but so that's the extra. So for me, the centre point, if there is one, is that, yes, for sure, the change that when we suddenly realise there's a little battle going on in the room, and that's just why. So yeah. And one last thing about the denouement, I find this extremely helpful. I'll just pass it on quickly. Moral reflection, all that lovely stuff is, but I find it hard to find that quite often. So I often resort to a simple thing called pluses and minuses, losses and gains for each of the characters or the main ones, because a victory comes with usually some tempering of loss, and so not every defeat comes with a total defeat. So it's intriguing just to look at your story and see what are the gains and losses at the end of. You could call it irony, but that's not probably a good use of the word. But I find that helpful when looking at how to handle the endings of pieces, just as a practical. I'm not very good on ethical reflections. I wish I were.
So do we. So the other thing that's interesting about this to me that I have never articulated before is that this particular structure works well when something is unfolding in front of your microphone, in front of your camera, which is your microphone in time, in real time, right? So if there's a scene in the homeless shelter, right, if something happens right there and then and you can capture it. The other thing too is maybe this structure's a scene and not your entire talk. Like the great thing is these are all ingredients, right? They're all things to play with and mush around with, just to have some consciousness that they're available to you as you're thinking about what you're doing.
You have a whale within a whale within a whale.
Yes.
You can.
So meta.
Or you can have a whale within a, we're doing meta docs,
Even an
you guys.
interview, perhaps.
Yeah.
Even the structure of an interview.
This is all on backwards, but that's okay.
No, absolutely, whales within whales. Scenes within pieces. Yeah.
Russian doll.
Yes, ma'am, you got
absolutely.
it. Actually, it's good to think of scenes like this too, if you as well.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, this is all on backwards. That Tanya, you can't rely on her for anything. So that's one of the main ones. The next one, and I know that the last time we did the course, Tanya was going to put this up, so I hope it's there, is a structure that, again, the great Stephen Schwartz introduced Me Too one time, the one and only time I got to work with him. Or meet him, I guess.
The late, great Stephen Schwartz. I'm sorry to tell you he died last year. Never mind.
So Karen Levine, since I've known her for a very long time, is the only person in Canada ever to have won 2 Peabodys. She's the documentary editor at the Sunday edition. And one of them was for this piece called A Murder in the Neighborhood. She made it several years ago. I don't know if you've heard it. If you haven't, you cannot call yourself a documentary maker unless you listen to A Murder in the Neighborhood. And in fact, Tanya has a great story about how hearing it was when she knew this is what she wanted to do with the rest of her life. So it's about an event that had happened in the past. It was, and I may get some of the details wrong, I'm sorry if I do, because it's been a while since I've heard it, but it was a woman who, it was a Sunday morning, it was a suburban Toronto neighborhood. Her husband killed her in her home. And what had happened was that she had managed to get out almost to the front porch, I believe. She was half naked.
Just a second. I'm just going to get the
Yeah.
feet off the car.
Thank you. There was a 19-year-old man, a boy, young man, and an older gentleman who came and tried to get her away from her husband. They couldn't. He pulled her back in and killed her. So all of that is laid out in the introduction. Every single bit of it. All the facts are there. So how do you make a documentary about something that happened in the past when you've just told the story? Do you guys have an answer? Do you have an idea?
Well, yeah, I think it was on our list to listen to it, right?
Okay, great. Did I get the description?
Yeah. Well, the way I sort of saw it was that, like, that event, the original event, probably happened in about 3 minutes, but she took 15 minutes, the first 15 minutes of the doc, to parse it out, to parse out every detail from, and it, like, it's told from the neighbor's perspective, so each step of that was laid out from every person's perspective about why they were going into the situation and who they were protecting and what their goal was, until and then we heard the shots. Like, so that whole it must have probably taken in real time 3 or 4 minutes, but she was able to tell that in a 50-minute time. And I think so telling the story, retelling it, she must have asked questions at every step of the way, chronologically, about how that unfolded.
Yeah. And Karen's technique is to bring people into the studio so she can microphone also, so you can hear all that emotion and all the rest. Does anybody else have a comment on it?
Yeah, I just heard it yesterday, and I honestly had never heard it before, so I was really grateful that that was suggested to us. To me, it was, that story would have been extremely well publicized. I don't remember it,
Yeah, it
but
was at the time.
I'm
It was a
sure
big
it
news
was.
story,
So
probably.
that story had been told, so I thought it was an incredible piece of insight into try to tell a story about the effects of a huge kind of tragedy on the individuals that experienced it. Those lives will be changed in a split moment. It reminded me of the other piece I loved called "The Man Who Fell from the Sky." The Man Who Fell to Earth. It's a BBC doc. It's fantastic. It's a guy that falls out of an airplane when the landing gear comes down, trying to come out of Africa, and he's an anonymous person that lies. It's incredible, like this piece, Dead in the Road, and it's all about all the people that don't know him, never will know anything about him, never met him, but he has changed their lives forever because he's a stranger who's died. And the story it does end up being about him, but just like this piece, I didn't really necessarily learn much about that woman at all, any more insight than I could have if I went and pursued it. I learned about the effects of this tragedy in a neighborhood on the people who experienced it and why they acted. Each of them acted so differently, especially the mother of the 19-year-old. Yeah. And then you find out that she wouldn't go to help a neighbor, and you wonder why, and you question whether you would yourself, and what would stop you from going into danger, and what would propel you to going into danger. And I thought it was unbelievable because it becomes revealed that she witnessed so much domestic abuse that that's the last thing she wants to walk into again. And each of the choices, the two men decided not to accept the hero award, and how they didn't feel like heroes, and how one will grapple with it for the rest of his life, and how the other one was like, I'm a 40-year-old weakling. I did what I could. I don't have that experience at all.
Yeah.
Just shows you how our lives are so different, how we can all react to one event, and it means so much different for each of us.
Yeah.
So I thought that was the incredible part of the story.
Absolutely.
You know, but
Absolutely. Anybody else want to talk about it a bit before I show you what I realized it was after the fact? Go ahead, Micah.
I was going to hedge with that. Sorry.
I did go to J school, but I've forgotten my structure or my names for the structures. But yeah, I guess for me, it was just like the way she honed in on every small, intimate detail. And in terms of, I guess, structurally, I don't know if it's like an ABA type thing, but it was sort of like the first half was telling the story sort of piece by piece in all the different voices. And then about halfway, it was like the death. And then it was almost like going back to all those same characters and retelling the same story and sort of going deeper into those details and then reflecting on how their own stories and, you know, what does it say about us that we do this to each other. And it was almost just like mirroring back on itself, but I don't know.
No, that's really interesting. It is, I'll call it, the structures she's used, which Stephen Swartz introduced to us, or to me as a concept, I'll call a spiral, essentially. It's almost like a whirlpool that turns you around and around and around and around and around until you're at this point where you think, oh my God, this is not a story about this woman. It's not a story about her murder. It is all those things, but it's about the fact that that day, a 19-year-old young man's life was changed forever, and he will never be the same. And she does it in such a beautiful, beautiful way, and so beautifully constructed, where, as you said, this first go-round probably takes you to the murder with all these various voices and all these different perspectives, and then takes you around that murder again and again and again until you get to the mother and her 19-year-old son. And it is extraordinary because it's circling essentially, again, another way of thinking of it is that her murder is the tent pole around which this thing is going like this, right? So it is a beautiful structure, incredibly painstaking, incredibly difficult. She did it all by instinct and because she's a genius. But that is what that is. And so it's another completely different way of thinking about structure. So in your case again, where your central figure is this man who's so alone, one way to do it would be to circle it, you know, everybody's interpretation around again and again. And I would imagine that in the end, their interpretations say more about them than it does about him. And that in the course of your documentary, by doing it like that, we will learn something about how we all respond to someone who chooses, or whatever, or by necessity, keeps himself apart from the rest of us. So this kind of structure is something that is potentially incredibly useful for you in yours. So I'll just call it what should I call it, you guys? The whirlpool, maybe? Spiral? If you can conquer that, you too will get a Peabody. Oops. Oh, sorry. How am I doing for time, you guys? I better start speaking faster, sorry. The next one is, I think, Daniel. Have you guys heard Daniel's talk? Yep. The Quest. This is really handy for people who are going out to discover something about something, like why do people write rotten things on bathroom walls? So the quest structure assumes we have a hero or heroine, and they are setting out to discover, in this case, why do people write horrible things about each other on bathroom walls? Or nice things. What's with this bathroom wall thing? The quintessential quest, obviously, is something like Lord of the Rings, right? Got to make it to Mount Doom and throw that darn ring in the fire. As with every quest, it's never a straight line, because if it is, it's really boring. The hero or heroine is going to meet people along the way who appear to help her. We'll just make her her. And maybe they're not really the helpers. Maybe they're actually a hinderer. Maybe they're not good, they're evil. Or maybe they're ambiguous. Or maybe they're both. But she is going to meet characters along the way, including the person who wrote rotten things about her way back when on the wall. And she's going to go on a journey where she's going to, circle around the lake of bones or whatever it is. So there's going to be helpers, and you will identify that. There's going to be hinderers, for lack of a better word. There's going to be obstacles. There's going to be discovery. There's going to be triumph. There's going to be a race against time, yeah, because this is all time. Yeah, this is time here. There's going to be loss. And with any luck, the ending will be ambiguous, because ambiguity is way more interesting than certainty. So at the end of The Lord of the Rings, good old Frodo sails off into the wild blue yonder, and we never see him again. He's gone to another place, a better place, right? So at the very least, there's ambiguity, because it's the most interesting result of all. Did you guys have any questions about the quest? We're just so imbued with that, right? We know that structure so flippin' well. So the other two are more kind of tricks you can use but they're also structure. They're kind of subsets of this stuff, all this kind of stuff that we talked about. One is joy of juxtaposition. So my infinitely famous, I repeat the same darn story every time, but it was really trying. I was working at what was then called Sounds Like Canada. No, what was it called? Was it Sounds Like Canada?
Yes.
Yeah, anyway. And yeah, it was before, it was when Michael and what's her name did it.
Okay.
Can't remember what it was called. Post. Sounds Like Canada, I think. Anyway. And I was doing docs, and I found a story of a couple in Hamilton who were the people who had gone to court the most times over custody issues of any couple in Canadian history. And Ira Basin, then my boss, said, good, let's have it for tomorrow. So I go out to Hamilton, and I interview the mother, and I interview the father, and I ask them exactly the same questions. And I just back them up, back. This is a technique used apparently a lot in Day 6. Joy of juxtaposition. So it was a completely non-narrated doc because I hate the sound of my own voice. There's an intro, and it was literally he says and she says. And everything you need to know about why this couple holds the record for going to court is revealed in I can't remember how long the piece was anymore. When you're really up against it, or even when you're not, the whole notion of giving your characters the same set of questions to answer and just using juxtaposition, even as one subset of what you're doing, really handy. Again, there's nothing, I did not invent this in any way, shape, or form. I stumbled upon it out of necessity, and that is essentially chapters. So another time I had to do marriage. What? In a week. Do marriage in a week. Great. So it was just chapters. And the choice of the 3 chapters and I think I did a bridal show. I went to divorce court. I can't remember what else I did. But just, again, it's kind of a form of juxtaposition, but it's just one story after another, and taken together. The 3 are greater than the sum of the parts, because in between these you see you get one picture. So it's essentially kind of like a triptych, I guess, or it can be more titches than that if you wish, but chapters. Really simple. And when you're under tight time deadlines and you are not going to be able to construct this, it's another way of doing it. Anything to add, Mr. Wadhams?
No, it's all great. Wish I'd known all this before.
You guys have any questions?
I guess, or
Do Do you want to grab the mic, Meek?
Always has to be on the record.
Yep.
I guess it's just, and it's not really a question, but I mean, I always struggle with trying to plan as much in advance. Like if I'm going to do the he said, she said, or she said, she said, and then going into it knowing that, or sort of just going out and getting whatever you want and then coming back to the editing suite and then realizing that you missed it or you didn't. And it's interesting because half the time it's like, oh, I went into it knowing, like I'm sure Karen, even though it was
conscious, knew exactly what she was going to do.
She was going for versus, you know, Steve saying the Justin Thorpe piece that, you know, you get back and you're like, oh, I've you know, figured it out. So it's always interesting kind of planning.
Yeah. So I think that's true of all reporting and certainly all documentary making. You plan, and then you keep yourself open to every contingency, right?
Yeah,
The same as when you are constructing a green for your host and you planned, and you've given them a perfect storyline and they see an opening and they go, I'm free. You plan and then you keep yourself open to what happens. So you've planned a he said, she, you know, that one, the joy of juxtaposition one, and all of a sudden a scene unfolds in front of you and you think, oh my God, this is, you know, rising tension, I'm going to be able to. So it helps to be conscious of what your possibilities are before you start out. You'll talk to Steve, you will together come up with a sense of which of any of these or all of these will work most easily for you. Like, to me, yours is a perfect quest, probably with things, you know, maybe other things embedded within. And some of it, you know, there's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, there's a million ways to tell a story, but if you have at least some sense of the structures available to you, and especially when you're starting out in your doc-making career, as I said, the great joy I hope that you all have is inventing new forms that we haven't even thought of yet.